All right, here we go, everyone. Another awesome episode of the All Around Adventure podcast. And my guest today is Samantha Anthony, who is the creator of Alternative Travelers, which she is the author as well as the host of the podcast. So, Samantha, thanks so much for taking the time for joining me today, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to chatting with you because it's always kind of nice when I interact with other travel-themed podcasters, out there. I mean, I feel like there's a good amount of us, but I think I'm slowly just starting to learn about more and more other travel podcasts out there.
Yeah, I agree. It's still pretty small, I think. I mean, my podcast isn't that old, 6 months, I would say. Yeah, and so I've just been diving into this world of travel podcasting, and it's growing, but it's still fairly small. So it's really exciting to connect with other travel podcasters. It's a really welcoming community, I've found.
Yeah, and of course, as you've probably noticed during the last 6 months, podcasting is a lot of work, and it's quite the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially with us starting out. Well, I know you have a co-host that you do for your podcast, but usually then we're also, not only are we the hosts, but we also have to double as the editors and then of course the producers and the marketers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And my co-host is my partner who we live together, we travel together and everything. And so that's its whole other host of things mixing those two spheres. It's great, but it's, it comes with its own things to navigate. But yeah, no, we're co-hosted. And so, cause we decided to just start getting our feet wet, not having interviews yet, which, because as you know, that's you're finding, people all the time. And it's really cool cause then you get to meet new people all the time, but it is that you always need to be, connecting. So.
Yeah, which there's a lot of fun to that, but sometimes it can be challenging. And I'll forewarn you both, once you start getting guests, a lot of people probably will say, no, that's been such the tough part is I'm thinking, oh, they'll probably love to come on this show, but then I'll either not hear back from them or it's just nope, sorry, we can't. So,
yeah,
it is what it is. But either way, it's tons of fun, easily. All right. Well, just to kind of learn a little bit more about you, I kind of want to go back in time a little bit. And this is usually how I like to start off my conversations with my guests is, every great story has a beginning. We've all started somewhere in our travel journeys. So where did yours start? Take us back a little bit here and just tell us, what was it that inspired you to become a traveler in the first place?
Yeah. Oh, I love going back in time. I love this question. Yeah, I was really lucky growing up. My parents were very into travel, specifically my mom. And so my sister and I have been just traveling from a very young age. My mom took us to Europe. Our first trip was to France when I think I was 6 and my sister was 4.
Oh, wow.
My mom took us by herself, bless her heart. I don't know how she did that. My dad, it was a 3-week trip. My dad came and joined for a week. And my mom just took us for the rest of the time. So I really give her so much credit for doing that. I couldn't imagine. But it had a really big impact on me, that trip. And then subsequent trips, because on my mom's side of the family, so my grandfather was Hungarian and my grandmother was Austrian. So my mom grew up going to visit Austria. You couldn't really visit Hungary at the time, but I think eventually she made it there. And so I think she just wanted to impart that travel from an early age onto us. And yeah, I still remember that first trip to France, even though I was 6. I remember going to these big castles, and that really made an impression. I remember, snippets here and there of different street scenes in Paris and all that kind of stuff. So I'm shocked at how much I remember considering I was 6 years old, but it clearly had a big impression. And I even recently, I was going through some old boxes of stuff and I found some travel writing from when we went to Budapest to visit my mom's family there when I was 11. And I had done some travel writing back then. And I was wow, I really was always into this. So yeah, that's kind of where my love of travel came from. And my parents, they went on like a round the world honeymoon for a year after they got married.
Whoa.
And they traveled around the world. Again, I feel strongly that was my mom who made that happen. She was like very much a planner. And it was a whirlwind trip that I could never do. They like moved places like every 3 days. But they also weren't working on the road. You know, they took vacation, whatever. And well, they didn't take vacation. They just quit their jobs, I guess. And then eventually came back. But yeah, so that whole like traveling around the world for a year, like in all the places they went, you know, just they would have stories, and that just always seemed so awesome. So yeah, there's always something like that I'd always had in my mind of something that I wanted to do. So
that has to be the most epic honeymoon tale that I think I've ever heard.
I know, right? I know. I mean, and they got so many stories from then. I mean, they were in Bali in like the 80s, so that's way different from now. They have some like haunted stories from like Scotland. Like they just got so many stories, and yeah, it was just all that kind of, it really made an impact on me. And just hearing those again and again, you know, throughout childhood or whatever. Yeah.
All right. Right on. All right. So now have you been able to double back to France shortly like thereafter? I mean, it sounds like this was probably like your first international experience was going to France when you were 6 years old. So have you doubled back to France since then?
Yeah, I've been back a couple times. Trying to think. Yeah, recently I was actually there last summer, actually. A friend of mine is French, and she and her family like run a restaurant in Nantes, France. So yeah, she was always like, oh, come visit. Like we met when we were both living in New York City, a very international city, of course. And so
right,
like, you know, we met there, and she was always like, oh, come visit. So yeah, last year we went and stayed with her and ate a lot at her family's restaurants. So that was really cool. And then I've been back also to visit some friends that were living in Paris a few years before that. Because one thing I like to do is just visit people where they live, wherever that is, because it's just interesting to see a local's perspective. I mean, even if it's someone that's just moved there, if they've lived there, you know, 6 months, they know some places and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's something I always like to do. And that's ended up, of course, like Paris is like a glamorous place to visit your friends, but I've also visited like some other places that are not as glamorous, but they've been really cool because visiting your friends, like I said, they just have like insights into places and stuff like that. So I'm just really, that kind of like guides my travel style now, is that I'm just open to going to places either where I know someone or where we're house sitting. And I'm sure we'll get into that whole thing later. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just am really kind of curious about the places I like to go to.
Right. You know, you just kind of made me think of something, and this is actually probably going to be the first time that I've asked a guest this question, but how do you feel about like revisiting places? Because for me personally, I wouldn't say I have like a disdain for revisiting places, but I just kind of feel like, you know, since the world is so big and, you know, let's face it, we have limited time on this planet, you know, sometimes I just, you know, feel like if I'm going to bump out and travel the world again, it's usually going to be to someplace new. But, you know, I guess, how do I want to phrase this question? I guess like, what would you say would be like the ratio? Again, there's probably a better way I could phrase this question, but like the ratio between some of your trips being return trips to a place versus like a new place that you would visit. What does that kind of look like?
I love this question. because it's something I think about a lot, actually. I know a lot of people don't like to revisit places for the reasons that you mentioned, but I actually love revisiting places because it lets me kind of like jump right in and like dive deeper, I guess. So like I've gotten all like the logistics out of the way. I know where to go. I can just kind of like land and like get right in and pick right back off and kind of like go and, you get all the main tourist sites out of the way or whatever, like you feel like you need to see, and then you can kind of dive a little deeper. So I do, like, for example, I will visit Spain. I love Spain. I lived there for 3 years, and I will go back there like every year. I will always go back. And then there's other places that I'll go back to. So I think, but then I do like to visit new places, of course. So you talked about like ratio. I'm not sure. Honestly, I feel like it kind of depends on. Normally, I do let like where we find house sits kind of dictate where we end up going, and so a lot of times they are new places. But then sometimes there's not new places, just places I want to go back to for whatever reason because I liked them. And
sure, yeah.
So I think it's maybe it's definitely more skewed in the revisiting places category, like maybe 70% like revisit, 30% not. It's a really good question, but it just depends on the year. Last year I went to a bunch of new places, and this year I haven't, but that's for obvious reasons.
Right. Yeah, it's been a bit of a year. Been a year. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I haven't been anywhere new this year. Actually, even before the pandemic happened, my only trip this year was to somewhere I had been to before. So, yeah, I guess it goes back to, not to be too long-winded about it, but just like being always like remaining curious, like everywhere that I am, and finding something new, regardless of if it's a place that I've been to before or not. And then there's always like, if you're revisiting a city that you've been to before, there's the surrounding areas, day trips. Like there's always, I guess, something new, even in a place that I feel like I've been to before. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And the city that comes to mind for me that I've revisited or been to twice now and pretty much had something new to do every single day, both trips, was London. And because, you know how London is. It's a big sprawled out city, lots of little nooks and crannies and hidden gems. And, you brought up New York City earlier. And, New York City is similar to London and what I call a culinary capital. Like basically you can find like any type of ethnic food from anywhere in the world in these cities. So London's like that too. And but yeah, I've spent about, I want to say like 5 days for each trip that I was there, and each day I've had something new to do. So I guess that does make that's a good point, because you're not going to see everything about a particular place in one trip. And even I'm sure like you've lived in Spain for, a few years, like you've mentioned, I'm sure there's probably even a lot of things there that you kind of maybe missed out on that in hindsight you wish you were able to see. So I guess, yeah. So I'd say, yeah, it does warrant to revisit some places. So right on. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm kind of flipping around a little bit in your timeline. So you mentioned some of the places that you've gone to, when you were younger, but at like what point did you kind of begin sort of experiencing travel for yourself, maybe going out and experience the world as a solo traveler? When did that kind of fall into the timeline?
Yeah, that kind of happened when I was in college. I always knew like study abroad was something that I wanted to do. And I actually like the program I entered into at university was called like Global Studies. And it was like you were supposed to live abroad for a year. And so that really appealed to me. That didn't end up happening. I didn't even end up studying abroad because I then transitioned to studying anthropology and archaeology. So in order to fulfill those requirements, all that kind of stuff, I couldn't do the study abroad. But I still was able to, in the summers, I did like an archaeological dig in Spain for one summer. And so that was kind of like my first international trip by myself. And the program that I chose was one that like, it was, even now that I think about it, it was like travel was like built into the program. It wasn't like you just go and do your field school in one place. It was like you, do some digging on an island, then you went to the mainland Spain, and then we traveled all throughout Spain, seeing like all these like famous sites, like historical sites throughout Spain. Then we traveled to another dig in Lisbon, or in Portugal, north of Lisbon, and then we dug there for a bit, and then we came back. So even like within this, like fulfilling my college requirements, I was getting some travel in. So yeah, that was my first international trip by myself. I had done some trips by myself, kind of like my first flight by myself. I was like 14. I was visiting, because my dad's side of the family is all from New York City. And so like I would always go spend like some summers there and stuff like that. So I was always like in and around New York. And so one summer I had flown there by myself. So that was like my first trip by myself, like on the plane as a minor, like you have to get escorted and stuff like that. And I thought it was so cool.
Going to the big city.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was my first trip on a plane by myself. And then my first international trip was in college. And then, so after college, after I graduated, I was like, I never lived abroad though. And that was something that I really, really wanted. And so I had been studying Spanish also in college. And so I had applied to this teaching program in Spain, like teaching English. And I just kind of applied, not really thinking anything of it. But then I had gotten in, and so then I was like faced with this choice whether I should go or whether I should, like, at the time I was like just setting myself up for a career in archaeology in New York City. And I had like great internships and a great job in archaeology, and like was really like going down that path. And then I had this like opportunity to live in Spain placed in front of me, and I was like, oh, what should I do? Like, and I ended up going to Spain because I was like, I'm going to regret not going. So.
Right. All right. Very cool. Now, putting in this application to apply to live in Spain, you said you kind of did it sort of like on a whim. Was there like maybe other places that, you might have been able to go live at for kind of like similar purposes that maybe piqued your interest and you just kind of chose Spain over the rest of them? Or was Spain kind of like the only option, I guess, at the time?
No, I didn't even know there was other, like, once I moved to Spain and like learned about the teaching English abroad world, then I realized that lots of people do this in tons of different places. But for me, it was like more about like, I wanted to go to Spain to like get better at Spanish. I was like, I studied this in college, like, but that's academic. Reading and writing is way different than speaking. So, and all my teachers, all my Spanish teachers were actually from Spain, which I learned later is like pretty uncommon in the US. Most Spanish teachers seem like from Latin America, but all of the teachers in that department were from Spain. And so like everything, like all the classes were infused with like Spanish history, Spanish culture, just like lots of the professors were from Spain. And so I learned a lot about Spain that way. And so that piqued my interest. And also like when I was in that program, the global studies program, I was supposed to go to Madrid for a year. So it was like that, it had already been on my radar. Oh, and also on the Spanish front, my dad's side of the family is Puerto Rican, but then they have like Spanish ancestry. I think my great grandfather or something was like Spanish Basque. So like I had that portion also that piqued my interest with specifically going to Spain as opposed to anywhere else. And then, yeah, like I said, I kind of was opened up to this world of people that like, I knew people that had taught in Korea and Thailand and all over the place. And I was like, oh, wow. But Spain just always appealed to me. And yeah, so I lived there for a few years doing that.
All right. Well, of course, like this wasn't your first rodeo visiting Spain either, because it sounds like the archaeological experience that you had there, well, the archaeology / history / cultural like trip that you got to take on, that sounds, pretty encompassing and all inclusive right there. That actually sounds like pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. But getting living there and just being amongst this culture that was I wouldn't say like entirely different from your own, but no doubt you probably noticed like some differences. What was kind of like your adjustment like with now living amongst a new culture? Was potentially like a culture shock something that you'd face, or do you think you were kind of able to sort of hit the ground running? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. Like whenever I think of culture shock regarding my experience living in Spain, my experience, I definitely had some kind of culture shock, like which I didn't anticipate, because I think people think of Western Europe and they're like, oh, that's kind of like, or this was my perception anyway. I was like, it's a fairly known entity to me because I had been there several times, and I was like, it didn't seem so foreign to me. So I definitely had some culture shock, not that much that it was like debilitating or anything like it. It didn't impede my enjoyment. My experience with culture shock was more on the reverse, actually. So when I came back to the US after living in Spain for 3 years, there was one point when I hadn't been back in the States for like a year, and then I came back and it was like really overwhelming. I just remember this particular experience in like a grocery store and just being really overwhelmed with all the food options, like how there were just like so many different flavors of Oreos and Cool Whip and all this stuff. And I was just like, this is so overwhelming, because in a Spanish grocery store, first of all, they're way smaller. And then you have like literally one of each thing. Like if you're looking for white vinegar, there's one. It's not like a million. I appreciate that. I personally I don't like grocery shopping that much. So anything that like makes it easier for me, I am all about. And so, yeah, that was hard. And that was more difficult for me than moving there. But there was things, of course, moving to Spain, like mainly, I think the hours of things are different there. No one like really eats breakfast. You have like a snack at like 11, and then you have lunch is from like 1 to 3 p.m. And this is one of the instances that really stuck out to me, was on that archaeological trip thing. We would stop, and when we're traveling through Spain, we would stop for lunch, and the people who were running the trip were Spanish. And so we would stop at a place and have lunch, and it would be like a couple hours. And me, like, I was very impatient, and I was just like, what are we doing here? We're just sitting here having lunch. Like that's a half an hour thing. And then you get going, doing your thing. Like I was coming from New York City, where I had gone to school and I had been living there. And so I was like on that like rushing kind of wavelength. And so Spain definitely, like that was probably, if I have to say one overall thing, was that it just kind of like taught me how to slow down. But at first that was like very confronting, because it was just like, I want things to be going faster. And why is this paperwork taking so long? And why aren't these things open? And why does the bank close at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday? And like all these kind of things that, I grew to just get used to and enjoy and like. And now I kind of like that pace. And I miss it at times when things can be very busy in New York City. But that was probably the biggest thing for me, the biggest culture shock and the biggest lesson.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird transition coming from, the hustle and bustle that is pretty much like the American lifestyle, and especially, in your case in New York City. I remember I spent 3 days in New York City and I felt like I was out of breath just because, everyone was just moving so fast through that city. And the city was just so alive. There's a lot of energy there. But and then I remembered trying to like slow things down when I was in West Africa for my Peace Corps service, and how, it would seem like it would take so long to do what would seem like the most simplistic of things to actually like get done. But either way, I just kind of sort of just jumped right on in. If there was like a food that seemed unusual to me, I would try it. If there was like some dance that seemed weird and I don't think I could do, I just jumped right on there. Even if I made a fool of myself, I just went for it. But definitely coming home, I can agree with you that reverse culture shock is much tougher to deal with, just because it's living in a developing country where there is like so little in the way of resources, and I have to collect water, and I have to do this and do that, and I didn't have running water, and coming back, and then I just, I don't want to dive too deep down this rabbit hole, but then when I see a lot of people who would just get really upset about what I thought were trivial things, like, the line at Starbucks, like being too long, or the barista got their order incorrect or something like that. And I'm like, oh goodness, here we go.
Yeah. That's so true. And Madrid, I was living in Madrid in Spain, and of course that's a big international city. So I didn't have that experience of, that big of a jump that you had, but I can't imagine what that would have been like. That must have been huge.
Yeah. We actually had a joke in the Peace Corps that, we served like 2 years in the country that we're called to serve. So I was in Gambia for that long, but we actually say that it's a 4-year commitment, like 1 year to apply, because it literally did take about that long to actually apply, then 2 years to serve, and then 1 year to get readjusted when we came back to the States. So, and that was more or less quite true. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because I had a really hard time readjusting I'm not sure I ever readjusted really to life in the US. Like I came back after living in Spain, and I tried to I was like, okay, I got my, year abroad out of my system. So I had done a year, and then I came back to New York City, and I thought I was going to start living my life. And, I just could never readjust to the pace. It was crazy to me, like you said, just exhausting. And I was just like, I can't do this. Like, where are my 3-hour lunches with wine for 10 euros? Just the price of everything. That was huge. And then just the pace of everything. So yeah, then I met my partner, and then I was like, hey, I know this teaching program in Spain. You're a teacher, like you should do this, and then I'll just come with you. So that's how I made my way back to Spain for 2 more years. But yeah, I don't know if I ever really I am now more so, of course, but I always take a lot of what I learned in Spain with me, and it's just kind of like a part of who I am now.
Right. Now a 10 euro 3-hour lunch with wine in Spain, that might get you like what, like a hot dog, like at a vendor?
I know, right? Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad. Yeah, I miss those lunches. Yeah, it'd be like a 3-course. It's called a menú del día, which is like the lunch of the day, and it's like a tradition in Spain. And so you have like the first course, second course. You have the first course, then you have the entree, and that comes with wine or a beer or soda if you want, and then you got dessert or coffee, and that'll be like ranging depending on where you are. Like big cities are obviously more expensive. It could range from like 9 to 12 euros, and then you just enjoy your time, and it was such an amazing thing. I went like every week at least to do that.
Right. Well, you just got me thinking of something. Like obviously different cultures around the world will have different relationships when it comes to food. And when I was in Japan, I was there for a study abroad, and whenever I would go out to dinner with some of the students, or we would go out to dinner as like a whole group, is that we found that most of the menu items were kind of just like small shareable things, because meals were kind of meant to be more of like an intimate gathering where everyone sort of comes together and you share, like you all kind of pitch in to get these different shareable items, and you all just kind of just have at them as you choose. Would you say that was kind of sort of what you observed from the Spanish when you were in Spain? It's like a social thing more than anything else?
Oh yeah, completely. I was just thinking when you said that, I was like, sounds exactly like Spain. Yeah. They're very, very social culture. Everything is about socializing at the bar, socializing for coffee, socializing in the plaza, all generations. I've seen infants in bars at 2 a.m. and like right next to, an 80-year-old granny, like, which I love. And they're some of the longest lived people in the world. And, food is about socializing. Yeah, you have this like lunch thing that I just mentioned, and people will come together and meet and do that. And then you have like tapas, which everyone kind of knows about that, but that's about, you share all these dishes and you're just chatting and you're just doing your thing. And I remember like, if I go out to eat, or like me and my partner, like whoever, we're just like downing that food. Like we're eating that food like really fast. And like he would always make comments about like, wow, you must have really liked the food, because we would just like eat it, like just demolish it, as opposed to like Spaniards would be like very politely, like, you know, they would pick like a croquette or something like that. And then, you know, this plate would be sitting there for like 15 minutes while everyone's chatting. They're not like going at their food like barbarians. Like, so yeah, it's really funny. That's so interesting about Japan. I haven't been. It's like one of my dream destinations, actually. So.
Oh, I think you would absolutely love it. It's just, you know, that was actually the first international travel experience that I had, and I did a little bit later in life. I did it when I was 25, so almost, gosh, about 10 years ago now. But that was what set it all like off for me, was just that experience. You know, just everything from the politeness and the discipline of the people and how welcoming they were, and just how beautiful the, you know, countryside was. It's all mountainous, and when you take train rides from city to city, you just got these amazing like mountain views that you get to see, and you know, just the history. The castles are beautiful, and I might have to stop it there because I'm getting really nostalgic. But
oh man, yeah, you're really like igniting that wanderlust in me. I'm just like, oh man, really got to get to Japan one day. Yeah, I can't wait, but it'll happen.
Okay, yes, and I'd say like my favorite cities. You know, we'll just leave it at that in case you're looking for some research ideas. Kyoto was probably my favorite. That's a pretty big city though too, so that might be, you know, budget like a few days, maybe even a week to see a good part of that city. And I really liked Okayama and Matsuyama were some of my favorites. Like Matsuyama Castle was this big castle way up on this this like mountaintop, and like literally had to take like one of those cable like car like seat things to actually get up there, you know. So it was and you got like this massive view of like the city down below. It's yeah, it was amazing. So
wow.
So yeah, there's a few ideas for you should you want to make it out to Japan.
Yeah.
All right, well, before I dive too deep down you know my history here, yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about yourself. And you did mention archaeology in there, and we touched on it a little bit earlier. And of course, that's actually my daily profession now. I'm an archaeologist by day, travel, self-development podcaster by night. So what kind of led you down that path to kind of pursue archaeology? And, you know, how long were you in the game for? Where were some of the places that you got to see along the way for that?
Yeah. So I got into it in college. Yeah, I was, like I mentioned, I was in this like global studies program, but it was kind of like, it was the first year they were doing this program, and it was kind of like a shit show. They just didn't know what they were doing. And I just got into it because I thought it would equal travel, and it didn't really. It was just kind of like philosophy and all this kind of stuff, which is like, just wasn't my jam. And so I was like kind of like thinking of leaving the program anyway, but wasn't really sure what I wanted to focus on. And then I had taken a human evolution class as a required class, and the professor was amazing, and it was so fascinating. And I was like, wow, this is it. I'm gonna be an anthropology major now. It was just kind of that leap. I was really into it. And so, I studied anthropology. I ended up focusing on archaeology just because it ended up interesting me. And I did that dig in Spain, and that further led me down that path. I did, and then I actually, for a couple summers, I did a couple digs in Buffalo, New York. And so that was a whole different prehistoric. That was totally different. That was really interesting. And then my last year of school, I ended up getting like internship in New York City with like the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. And that was really interesting. I was really interested in New York City archaeology. I know a lot of people are like, what is there in New York? Because when people think of archaeology, they think of like, you have to go somewhere else to do it. And I'm like, well, history happened everywhere. So
right.
There is stuff everywhere. And I was kind of going down that path. I started working at a commercial archaeology firm in Brooklyn, and I was I was actually, now that I think about it, I was working on a podcast back then as like a part of my job as an entry level thing. The person who headed up that firm had an archaeology podcast. I don't remember the name of it now, or if it's even still around. But yeah, that's really funny. I didn't actually think of that before. My first intro to podcasting way back when. But yeah, and so then, but I didn't really go work in archaeology that long, because when I got that offer to go to Spain, then I took that. And I kind of always dabbled here and there. Like when I was living in Spain, I was teaching English in high schools, and one of my co-teachers, her boyfriend was an archaeologist, and he was working on, as a volunteer, finding and digging up like Spanish Civil War unmarked graves, and like burying them properly, and helping give closure to the families and stuff like that.
Right.
And I remember going to one of those times when they like found the grave, and they were, or the place where the person had been buried, and they were digging it up and stuff, and there was a whole bunch of people there, and the guy's brother was there, and he was like 85, and he was like talking with someone else. I didn't like talk to him, but I just remember like feeling that like tremendous like weight and like somberness of that experience of just like that guy's brother was there.
Wow.
It was really powerful. And I really give those volunteer archaeologists so much credit, because they're not being supported at all in doing that work. And yeah, archaeology in Spain is really difficult. There's so much there, of course, but there's just no money in it, which I feel is the common thread of archaeology. But yeah, so that I just kind of always kept my feet just in archaeology in some ways, even if I wasn't working directly in it. And then once a couple of years later, I started freelance writing and editing, and I ended up working on a lot of anthropology and archaeology textbooks.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that was like a random turn of events, but it was cool because it let me still be involved in anthropology and archaeology, even though by that point I had kind of like realized that I didn't really want to fully go down that career path for a number of reasons. I have a lot of friends still in archaeology and people who I've talked to, and it was just like I was at the crossroads where I was like, okay, either I like get a PhD or I don't, and I go in a different direction. And I kind of decided to kind of go in a different direction, and that was Spain kind of had that influence on me. And I also part of what I did in my first year in Spain was I walked the Camino de Santiago. I don't know if you know that.
I think I know of it, but I haven't dove too deep into exactly the particulars. So
yeah, it's like a pilgrimage, long distance through hike, basically. So I did it. You can start wherever you want, but I did it from like the coast, from the border of France to the end point is Santiago de Compostela, which is a city in the region of Galicia in northwestern Spain, like just above Portugal. So it was like 500 miles, like 1,000 kilometers of walking. It was like, took me like 35 days or something like that. And so that was like a really transformational, if I had to pinpoint one transformational life experience, it was that. And it was on that time when I was kind of at this crossroads, and I didn't know what to do with my life. I was like, do I go for an archaeology PhD or do I do something else? But I wasn't sure what the other something else was. And it kind of like, but I was talking to people along this way, because you just come across other people that are doing it, and you kind of like end up, a lot of people fall into little groups of people they really click with, because you're walking the same trail every day. So, you get to really know people. And I met a lot of people just from all kind of alternative backgrounds and lifestyles that made me realize what I really wanted was to live more of a creative life. I'd always been like a writer, always been just like into creating, but I'd kind of put that on a back burner because I was also very academic and like high achiever academically. So it kind of like reignited. I met some artists and I walked with them like the whole way. And it made me realize that that's what I actually wanted. And then I could still travel, because part of what appealed to me about archaeology was traveling. And I was like, well, I can still be interested in archaeology and still, learn about it, be connected, still kind of be in that world and travel and maybe live some kind of creative lifestyle, which is what I realized that I actually really wanted.
Well, even if you aren't going to seek out archaeology for the long haul, I think, having a background in archaeology does kind of actually enhance the travel experience a little bit more because, your brain kind of starts to like look for things that you probably wouldn't have like before, traveling before you became an archaeologist. I kind of look at things like earthworks and like buildings and also just street layouts, whatever it is. And I kind of look at it with that sort of archaeological sense thing. And okay, so what was it that was practical about them laying out the streets in this formation? Why was it this length? And why was the earthworks put up? And then all this stuff just kind of rattles off. And it's a good thing, like a whole lot of people haven't traveled with me since I became an archaeologist. Otherwise, I'd be like, trying to be a wannabe tour guide, like all of a sudden. But anyway, so that's been what my experience like. What about for yourself? Would you say that you've kind of experienced like similar things since you, kind of became an archaeologist yourself?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And I always like want to just go to like the archaeological sites or the museums or like whatever it is. I remember I was like so excited to go to Atapuerca in Spain, like a famous human evolution site, and I was like so excited about it. And I have like places I want to go to that are big sites and stuff like that, that probably a lot of people would be like, why do you want to go there? Who cares? But so I always search those things out, and that does inform, my enjoyment of a place. And even like just anthropological perspective in general, just like always being curious and observing people. And I still find, even though I'm not like technically working in anthropology or archaeology, I still find that it informs so much of my perspective and thought process and like looking into things and like understanding how the history of a place is so important to like now, like what's going on now and all that kind of stuff. Like we can just forget about history. So I always try to like infuse that into like my writing or podcasts and stuff like that. So it definitely informs that. So I agree completely.
All right, right on. Well, kind of taking this turn to take on a more creative approach, that you're undertaking right now with not only alternative travels, your blog, the podcast. And one thing that's kind of been woven into all that is that, a lot of what you and your partner are doing right now is going around house sitting. We touched on it a little bit at the start of our conversation, but let's kind of take a deeper dive. So what was it that led both of you to take on house sitting as you are now?
Yeah, it was kind of part of, so when I mentioned moving back to New York City and never really being able to readjust and trying to figure it out, it came at that time because that was the time that I met my partner Veren, and we were just both like frustrated in New York City. I think a lot of people see New York and they're like, why would you ever want to leave? Like so many people want to move there. And then, it can be a difficult place to live because it's expensive. And if you want to live a more creative lifestyle, it's hard because you have to just work all the time to be paying your bills and your high rent. So right. when do you have time to be creative? Like you don't, so I was just looking and searching for alternatives of how to, I guess, take flight again from New York. And I had thought that I would do like an around the world trip, like I mentioned my parents had done. Like I thought I was going to do that. And I had mentioned that to my partner, and he's like, well, why don't we just try to figure out how to make that happen, but like long term, like you don't have to just have it happen for a year, just make it more sustainable in the long run. And so that got me thinking, and I think I came across house sitting on a blog, actually. I had also was looking at like work exchange, where you work and then you in exchange for room and board. But house sitting is also an exchange where you take care of someone's pets in house in exchange for accommodation. So like there's no money changed hands between either party. And so I thought that was pretty cool. I've always loved animals. And so I've always had cats growing up. So I was like, yeah, of course, I could definitely take care of someone else's animals. That would be great. And then I get to stay somewhere for free. That sounds pretty cool. So we were kind of putting all these potential plans of leaving New York in motion. I had quit this job that I was doing that was like, I was so overworked and underpaid. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I quit, and I like went to like this Buddhist meditation center north of New York City. And I just was trying all these things out. And we were applying to a lot of house sits, just kind of anything that was a few months. We were like, we just want to try this out. Like maybe it's a bust, maybe it's a scam. We don't know. So, but we ended up connecting with this guy in Salt Lake City, Utah, who needed someone for 3 months for his cat. And we just we Skyped with him, and we ended up connecting. And so he invited us to come. And so we went, and it was great. It was a great experience. And we were like, yeah, this is pretty cool. So we could definitely do more of these. So that's kind of how it started.
Gotcha. So just like a classic bartering type sort of setup, it's like, don't have to change money. It's like, just give us a place to stay. We'll take care of the pets, basically. Just simple. So right on. So like, how do you go about finding, house sitting gigs now? Are there like maybe like websites out there similar to like Airbnb that are just for like house sitters? How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. There's membership websites where they're kind of like dating platforms in a way. I like to always give that analogy, because you're just the website isn't like finding anything for you. It's just a place where pet owners, because it's primarily like pet sitting. It's people call it house sitting, but it's primarily like there's pets involved, like 95% of the time. So people, because that's the main impetus, like people want their pets to be cared for at home. They're more comfortable in their own environment, and then obviously they save a ton of money on pet care. So it's really great for both sides. I just really like that whole exchange, because both sides are getting such a great thing. Like, they're getting their pets taken care of. We're getting a place to stay, and it's really great. So so a pet owner will put their listing on the website, and then the pet sitters can apply to that listing. And so that just starts the conversation going. And then, in the listing, they'll say where they are, what their pets are, what their responsibilities are, have some photos ideally. And then you just apply, and, you send over a little message saying that you're interested. And then the house sitters, they also have a profile. So, you have your experience, you have where you've house sat for before, you have your reviews that you get from people that you've house sat for in the past. So it does work like Airbnb in a way, in that, like, if you're going to be shitty on either side, it's going to screw you over in the long run, because then you're not going to be able to do it again. So that's kind of what I always like to say for people that are trepidatious about it, that are like, oh my gosh, I don't know about inviting someone into my home that I don't know. But people are fully vetted on there, you can see how many reviews they have and where they've house sat and stuff like that. And then vice versa, you can see the same thing on the house sitter side. I mean, it still involves like a large amount of trust, of course.
Right, of course.
And I think maybe even more so than Airbnb now, because Airbnb now, like maybe it was more like Airbnb in kind of like the early days. But now Airbnb, a lot of it has gotten very like commercialized and stuff like that. So you can just instant book and stuff like that. Whereas house sitting is not like that. Like you can't put in specific dates and specific location and get a house sit. Like it depends on the availability and who needs a house at a certain time. So you do have to be a lot more flexible than if you just want to book a place on Airbnb. But then of course, in return for that flexibility, you don't pay, for a place. So it kind of has its trade-offs.
Right. Okay. Very cool. And what's the name of that website?
The one that we use is called Trusted House Sitters. Trusted
House Sitters. Okay. I'll drop a link for it in the show notes for this episode if any of our listeners want to go and check that out. So you did mention Salt Lake City was one of the places that you all have house sat at. Where are some other places that you all have been to along the way?
Oh, we've been very lucky to go to a lot of places. So yeah, in the US we've been to, Salt Lake City, which was really cool, actually. Everyone from New York was like, why are you going there? Like, but it was really cool. It was really interesting. Utah's beautiful.
It is. Absolutely.
We actually just went back there this year. So talking about returning to places. Yeah, we just went back to the same house sit 4 or 5 years later. So that was cool. And so Utah, Portland, Oregon, which is awesome. Greensboro, North Carolina, and Asheville. In North Carolina, we were for a bit. New York City, we house sit a lot because all my family is in New York now, most of them. So we return back there pretty often, like a couple of times a year, but usually with house sitting because everyone lives in like tiny 1 bedrooms. So no one has a place to stay. So we're usually house sitting, even though we're visiting family. But that's really cool. Also, because it enables us to like see people without like being in there. We still have our own space because, anyway. And then, so that's in the US. Oh, and the US Virgin Islands was another one. Wow. Yeah, I know. Right.
No,
yeah.
Talk about a nice place to go house sit. Wow.
I know. Yeah. We were there for like 6 weeks and that was a pretty epic one because it was, a solar powered, like off grid house in the Virgin Islands. They had the most amount of pets. They had 17 animals.
Wow.
Which is like, normally we would not sign up for that many, I have to say, but
it's a little mini farm right there.
Yeah. Well, it was more like, it was kind of like a little mini animal shelter almost. Like it was really well set up. It didn't feel like you were living with 17 animals. There was 3 cats and a dog in the house. So that was it. And then the rest of them were like outdoor animals. So there was like a couple dogs that lived outside because it's the Caribbean. So it's like 75 degrees all the time. And they had like a little place to come inside on the porch. So it wasn't like they were just out in the weather all the time. And then they had a little cat sanctuary area for a lot of outdoor cats. So I say 17 animals, but it wasn't like a house full of 17 animals. But yeah, that was really cool one. And the people were really cool. So that was a great one. Very interesting. Learned a lot. And so that was kind of in North America. And then in Europe, when we were living in Spain and then traveling after, we got to go to a lot of different places because it's just so well connected. And there are a lot of people just, it's easy to travel between countries. So people are traveling a lot. So they need house sitters a lot to take care of their pets. So we house sat a lot of different places in Spain, Italy, Germany, UK, in England and Scotland.
So lots of opportunities out places there all over the world. Nice.
Yeah, and that's just the place that we've been. I mean, some people focus on Southeast Asia. Other people, it kind of varies on where house sitting is popular. It's not as popular in like Latin America or other places, whereas it's popular in like Australia and the US. I think it has to do with cultural just barriers and stuff. Like, for example, in Spain, everyone who house sat for in Spain was an expat. And I know it's because having a lot of Spanish friends and having some insights in Spanish culture, I know it's because it would be very weird to bring someone that you don't know and stay in your house. Like the house is like a sanctuary.
Right.
So it definitely, I know that's the case in many other cultures as well. So the availability kind of depends, but there's a lot of expats that need house sitters because they need to go home to like visit their country of origin. So yeah.
Okay, cool. And what's next for you all now? I mean, do you all have like another house sitting stint like lined up in the future, or what's that looking like?
Yeah, we're planning on house sitting over the holidays in New York City for repeat cat that we have sat for before, and I love him. He's so cute, so I'm very excited about that. Yeah, normally we are doing it full time, but we've kind of like, because of the pandemic and everything, we're not doing that full time at the moment. So yeah, we're just kind of doing some ones in New York City. We're in New York State right now, so it's like very close. And yeah, just kind of seeing what 2020 is going to hold. I feel like it's just, who knows?
Yeah, I
so
think
we're not planning too far out.
Yeah, I think we just need to get to 2021 already and just, start fresh. I think we all need it. So
yeah, exactly.
All right. So we kind of touched on, we talked about a lot in this conversation. And as you know, one of the things that I like to do with this podcast is I try to extrapolate some life lessons from my guests based on their experiences. We talked about a few, but what would you say are some of the biggest takeaways and biggest life lessons that you've learned from, your adventures? And that may seem like a loaded question because there could be a lot of them, but I guess I'll just ask you what kind of comes to mind right offhand.
I think primarily it's the importance of having control over your own time is really important to me. And I've learned that over the years, just how important that is to me, I guess. And I think a lot of people are learning that right now as they are maybe able to work from home and have more freedom over their time, how good that feels, I guess, to have more autonomy over be able to maybe like shift your hours or like take a break when you might need to, or all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was really probably my big takeaway and from my travels has been having the freedom over my own time and my own decisions. And yeah, I think that's something that everyone can kind of build into their life. And of course, there's going to be a whole range because not everyone can work for themselves and not everyone can work from home. But I still think just building in those pockets of freedom and free time to kind of like just let your mind maybe wander, be creative. I think everyone is creative. A creative person. It's just whether you allow yourself the time to cultivate that creativity.
Right. Well, I mean, the harsh reality is that, time is finite for each of us. It's we're all up against the clock, figuratively speaking. So it's I like that point because, and actually that might be a first to come up on the podcast. I've asked like I don't know how many guests, but quite a few now, like this question. And I think that's the first to come up. So I appreciate that. Right
cool.
On. All right. Well, you got some resources available for our listeners. You got the House Sitting Handbook, and you also have the podcast that you are putting out there with your partner, and you all are putting out that. So, I guess tell us a little bit about those and, what our listeners can expect.
Yeah. So our podcast, the Alternative Travelers Podcast, is just about that, alternative travel, everything related to alternative travel. We're just all about finding alternative to kind of the conventional travel narrative that's out there, just really diving deep into different topics that don't get a lot of kind of coverage, I guess, in mainstream travel publications. That's just maybe about where to go and all that kind of stuff. So we like to dive deep into topics. Yeah, it's me and my partner, Veren. And so we have that podcast, and we talk about like stuff like house sitting on there as well. It's kind of just everything about finding alternatives to travel. Anywhere that people listen to podcasts. And then the House Sitting Handbook is our book all about house sitting, and it's just basically everything you need to know about house sitting. we get so many questions about it, and we have a lot of free resources, also like blog posts, and we have some podcast episodes on it and different stuff. But it's really to do house sitting in a way that's rewarding and is the gift that keeps on giving, I guess, like to continually house sit in a way that like makes like is works for you, because it is kind of a personal thing. A house sit that I might like, someone else might not, and vice versa. So it's the book, the House Sitting Handbook, is just all about just guiding you through like every step of the way, and just all our tips and tricks, like everything is in there. Comes with like a workbook, so just to help people figure out what's best for them. And yeah, people can find that on our website as well, alternativetravelers.com.
All right. And I'll get those linked up in the show notes as well, so listeners can go and find them there. So getting into the wrap up, because we're starting to draw near the end of our time, another thing that I ask my guests to do is to issue a challenge to our listeners, because we've covered some great topics today. We've put out a lot of good information, but information can only take our listeners so far. They have to follow it up with action, once they're done listening to this podcast. And so what challenge would you issue to our listeners today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
This is a great one. I love this. I love a good challenge. I would say I would challenge everyone to go out and explore your local area, like be curious about your local area and find new places that you haven't discovered before, because I just keep hearing again and again, so many people are really down that they can't travel more widely right now. And I totally get that. But at the same time, I think there's so much that we're all overlooking in our own backyards. And I say this because I was there. I know this completely, because I always, having grown up, like most times I was traveling, we were hopping on a plane going to Europe. So like for me, travel had to be going across an ocean. And it was only until like I met my partner now, who he had done way more US travel than me. And he was like, there's so much to see in this country. And I had always just completely written off travel, like domestic travel completely, which is ridiculous. I know, because the US is such a massive and diverse country. But I'm saying this because I know that so many people feeling grounded and frustrated maybe, or just, you look forward to trips and now that's off the table. But there is still a lot that you can still infuse that curiosity and that desire for travel, and that putting yourself out of your comfort zone, finding new things. Maybe it's trying a different food that you never tried if you can, or whatever it is. So that's my challenge, to kind of travel, bring your desire for travel and new experiences to your own backyard.
Right. And, there's a lot of other benefits that can come from that too. Like, right now, like small businesses or local restaurants, they could use the business, no doubt, right now too. So if you can find like maybe a new local spot that you've never tried before, drop in and see what they have to offer. And, in turn, that helps them just as well too. So, all right. And yet another first challenge to come up on the podcast, Samantha. So
I love it. I'm hitting them out of the park today.
All right. Awesome. All right. So what I have for you next is my final three. These are three fun questions. At least I like to think that they're fun, that I ask all my guests at the end of the show as well. And the first of those questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
You cut out for a second.
Oh yeah. Okay. I think I got you back now. Are we back?
We're back. I just missed your question.
Okay. All right. I was asking what, dang it, and I let it up so well too.
Sorry. I know.
It's okay. So I was asking you, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
Oh, well, I think maybe people can already guess based on what I've said, which is Spain. I love Spain. Does it have to be a city or can it be a country?
It could be as narrowed down as you'd like it to be. Okay.
I'm just going to say Spain then. I love Spain. Like I said at the outset, I'll go back there. Even when I was living there, I was just so curious about the whole country. It's such a diverse country. northwestern Spain is very green and rainy and not what people think of as Spain at all. It's part of one of the Celtic nations. It has fascinating history. And then southern Spain is like very different. So the whole country is just so different. And yeah, Spain. I'm pretty sure I'll end up living there someday. Whenever I settle down more permanently, it'll be Spain. I have no doubt.
All right, right on. And the next question: what is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
I have two, but okay, I'll pick one. I was gonna say either Japan or New Zealand. Those are my two like top places I want to go to. But yeah, I think New Zealand primarily. I mean, I want to go to them both so bad. But yeah, New Zealand. It just seems so beautiful. Just the landscapes seem incredible. And I want to be able to spend like a significant amount of time there since it is like, pretty far from the US anyway. So yeah, that's probably top of my list.
Now, you could probably swing them both in the same trip, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Kind of. No, I mean, hopefully. Yeah. That's what I would plan. Just spend like a year over there.
All right. Very cool. And the last question, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Oh my gosh. I knew you were going to ask this question, and I've been like racking my brain all day about it because I'm like, do I have a favorite animal? Like my favorite animal is, I would say like, I love cats, but that's just so generic. So I was like, I can't say a cat. They're not even in the wild. I mean, there are cats in the wild, which yeah, maybe. Then I was thinking about this. I put a lot of thought into this. So then I was thinking I really love primates. And so I was trying to they're so fascinating. So I was trying to narrow it down. And I think gibbons are really fascinating and interesting. They pair for life. They have an interesting way of moving through the trees. Yeah. So maybe I would pick them. I have not seen them in the wild. Unfortunately, I haven't seen many cool animals in the wild, which is quite unfortunate.
So all in due time, though. All in due time.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll happen.
And yet again, another first. No one's mentioned gibbons before.
I know. I can't. I know. Well, it's very random. Well, I listened to your podcast the other day about the wildebeest. The guy had the wildebeest. So that's another level.
Yeah. This second season of the All Around Adventure podcast, all kinds of new and fascinating animals are coming to the forefront. So
I love that question, though. It really made me think. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. All right, Samantha, before we close out here, let's just recap again where our listeners can go to connect with you. You're out there in the internet and social media space, and, you also got the House of Sitting Handbook and the podcast. So websites, social media accounts, where can we find you?
Yeah, so basically it's all at alternativetravelers.com. And I should say Travelers with one L for any listeners that might spell it with two L's. I know, is it, I don't know, the British spelling, and I think maybe Canadian spelling is with two L's.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's American and .com. And then at Alternative Travelers, I'm most active on Instagram. That's kind of like where I hang out a lot of the time. So connect with me on there, but also on Facebook at Alternative Travelers as well. And then the Alternative Travelers podcast, wherever people want to listen to their podcast. It's also right on our website. You can just stream it from the front page, but yeah, it's all there.
All right. And as I mentioned, I'll get all those linked up in the show notes for this episode so listeners can go and find them there. Well, Samantha, I tell you what, I really enjoyed our conversation today. I'm glad we were able to link up to do this. It's always great to just take a trip down memory lane and just, hear some amazing stories. And then I get to pitch in some of my experiences as well. So I had a lot of fun, and I think our audience really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being here tonight and just sharing all this with myself and the listeners. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you again. No, I loved the memory lane. It was great. And you got so many great questions that really made me think. So yeah, it was really fun.
Okay, right on.